Who is he? My head. Oh.
Okay, folks, we're ready to go with our next speaker. And I want to start off by saying that in 2007, Ruben Uriarte and I had just published our Mexico's Roswell book, and we got invited to speak at the UFO Festival in Roswell for the first time. And it was a thrilling experience for us. We had, you know, Ruben had been to Roswell several times, but I had never been, so I really enjoyed going there. And I remember vividly that one of the speakers who most captured my attention, who was speaking there that year, was our next speaker today, Lloyd Pye. And I went into the little library that they have there at the UFO Museum, and I listened to this fascinating information about this strange skull that was found in Chihuahua State, which did not look entirely human, and subsequent scientific studies revealed that it appears to not be human, and he'll be talking about that this afternoon. But right now, Lloyd is bringing us another incredible topic of his, which is his talk about the intervention in the development of our race, of our planet, by extraterrestrials. So at this time, it's my honor to present to you Lloyd Pye.
Thank you, Noe, and it's a pleasure to be here. And today we're going to talk about three things in this lecture. We're going to talk about the origins of the universe and of the Earth itself. We're going to talk about the origins of life on Earth. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about hominoids, which is Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, things like that. These are all subjects that I deal with. Where's the thing that goes forward?
In my pocket.
It's all right. Yeah, got it. Okay, that works. The origins for creationists are that day one we had light, day two water and sky, day three land and plants, day four planets, day five fish and birds, day six animals and men. This was done by divine will, divine power, miracles, or magic, however you choose to look at it, but it was done. Origins for scientists is that everything was done rationally, naturally, that incremental changes, mutations in genetics caused gave fish the ability to turn into amphibians, amphibians to turn into reptiles and mammals to turn into humans. And everything on Earth, except humans, is eat, survive, reproduce, and we have the incredible ability to stand there and say, what's it all about? So obviously something very special happened with humans. The scientific method versus the creationist method is that all you need to know for science is that nature can do anything. Nature can, whatever puzzle, whatever mystery, whatever there is, their answer is, well, nature can do anything. And with creationists, it's the same thing, but it's God. All you need to know is that whatever you look at that's a puzzle or that's confusing to you, God can do it. And that's the debate that's been going on for hundreds of years. And there's still no conclusive winner in this debate. There's this evidence this is evidence for creation, this is evidence for evolution, but nobody wins. And what that means is they're both wrong. They're both wrong. If either one of them was conclusively, obviously, winnably right, it would be over, but it isn't. So the truth has to lie in the middle ground somewhere. And that middle ground is intervention theory. And intervention theory says that it's not nature, it's not God, it's intervention. It's things coming here to have an effect, to change things, to make things happen. And that's symbolized by the creation fish and the evolution fish being blown out of the water by an alien-eyed rocket fish powered by the DNA of genetics. Now, who's driving that rocket ship? Who's driving the rocket ship? Well, at one level, it's aliens. And aliens are those beings that are in the neighborhood, that live with us, that are contemporaneous with us. They are our neighbors, and possibly our friends. We don't know that yet. But then there's another group of rocket ship drivers who are best termed terraformers. And these are different. These are not the aliens who live in the neighborhood. The terraformers are something else entirely. They are the ones that create the universe as we understand it, and the solar systems and all the things that go within that, the terraformers. Now, how science insists the universe began is with the Big Bang Theory. And that states in essence that in the beginning there was nothing which exploded. And it is absurd. On its face, everyone's always understood that there's just something wrong about that there's just nothing there except this little bitty thing, and somehow it explodes and the universe is there within a matter of basically a few minutes right at first, and then it just goes slowly out from there for billions of years. But there's a reason for that, which is they don't really have a good answer for it otherwise. So this is the answer that they get. They say the universe forms at 14 billion years ago with gravity as the binding force. And that's what they insist, that gravity is the force that holds the universe together. And they do that because that's what Isaac Newton said, and that's what Albert Einstein said, and everything that they have is based on those theories of those guys, and they don't want to give that up. They don't want to throw it out because it's really all they have. And so to start over would be so very difficult, and they just avoid it every way they can. So what they found was that when they started trying to put the relevant math formulas together with gravity as the core, they found that it didn't work. None of the math would work. It was clear that they were wrong. But rather than admit they were wrong and that gravity wasn't the answer and seek the answer elsewhere, they just said, okay, we're going to put in these massive fudge factors that will allow the formulas to work. As you see here, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2, then a miracle occurs. That's basically what mainstream science does. It calls on miracles the same way religion calls on miracles to explain things that they can't explain otherwise. But just keep in mind that the math does not work with gravity. What you get for your fudge factors are pretty good sized things. They are required by the Big Bang formula, and they have familiar names. Dark energy is 74% of the universe. 74% of the universe. Dark matter is 22% of the universe. Actual matter is only 4%. This is the equivalent of you being a mathematician, being one of these cosmologists, and working out 3 plus 2 equals 1. And you know that's wrong. 3 plus 2, but it keeps coming out as 1. So what do? You put in a fudge factor. 3 plus 2 equals 1 plus 4. You stick the 4 in and you make it work, and now you've got 5. Now you have the answer, you know it's right. That is what cosmology does today with those fudge factors of dark energy, dark matter. Can't see it, can't measure it, can't in any way prove that it's there, but trust us, it's there. That's how it works. In fact, there is one number that demolishes gravity-based cosmology. One number. 10 to the 39th power, which is 10,000, which is 10 followed by 39 zeros. 10,000 billion. That is the power of electricity compared to gravity. Understand that. Electrified plasma that permeates the universe is the glue that holds the universe together. It's what causes the aurora borealis, the northern lights. We're awash in it constantly, and so is everything else. That is what holds things together. Because the math works. When you plug that number 10 to the 39 into the formulas, you don't need the fudge factors. But science doesn't want to go through this agony of changing everything they profess to be real and true, because it shows basically how little they actually know about anything. Regardless of how it happened, gravity or electrified plasma, the solar system seems to have formed at around 4.5 billion years ago. But understand, in the way that we're told that it happens, where little grains of dust collide and stick together and make bigger grains and bigger rocks turn into boulders, and everything out there in space holds together and aggregates with gravity. When in fact, you've already seen from the math, the power of gravity at that level, at that size, is infinitesimally small. It would not happen. Gravity does not work at that size piece of thing. Gravity only works at large scale. Gravity only works when you get something really, really big put together already, and then gravity becomes a factor. So understand that the plasma, the electrified plasma, puts it all together, and then gravity comes alive and becomes a force in the universe. This is protoplanet Earth at 4 billion years ago. 4 billion years ago. Rocky land appears at 3.8. So what happens is the Earth pulls together with the solar system, forming at around 3.5, the protoplanet at 4.0, and at about 3.8 you're getting land. And as the lava cools in the frigid temperatures of space, just understand, you have a seething ball of lava whistling through the freezing, sub-freezing vacuum of space, and it's cooling at the surface, and you're beginning to get land, and you also get atmosphere. You get gases as the steam comes off of whatever particular stones you have that are molten. You get different kinds of atmospheres. Out of that, at some point, according to science, there's a warm pool of water somewhere with some basic molecules in it, and it's struck by a lightning bolt. And suddenly, magically, life appears. And here you have it's called the primordial soup theory. And as you see, the lightning bolts are not included. Because in the early atmosphere, there wouldn't be clouds like we have them today. There wouldn't necessarily be lightning like we have today. So where did the lightning bolts come to hit the warm pond, and where did the warm pond come from? Because, as you see, there's no warm ponds at around 3.8 billion years ago. It's nothing but just seething, steaming cauldrons of lava and whatever liquid else there might be there. It isn't conducive to life. And yet, there you have it. Life does appear at around 3.8. Now, what science says basically is, and Terrence McKenna had this great line, if you will grant us one miracle, we can explain the rest of it. But the miracle we need is the beginning of life. Because that idea of the lightning bolt into the warm pond, they know how absurd that is. They know how ridiculous that is. Not only on its face, but in reality. Because here you see in the yellow brick road to life, you have hydrogen cyanide, ammonia, formaldehyde, carbon monoxide, and water. That part of it is reality. The part at the top that you see, that's reality here. This business about amino acids and nucleotides and purines and fatty acids and all this turning into this is ridiculous. It doesn't happen. You can't make it happen in the lab. And especially those turning into proteins and DNA and lipids to make the outer coatings of cells, ridiculous on top of ridiculous on top of ridiculous. Cannot happen, did not happen, they can't make it happen, but yet it had to happen for things to occur naturally, according to the mainstream belief. It did not happen that way. How impossible is it? Fred Hoyle had a great quote. For the simplest molecules to turn themselves into the simplest life form is the equivalent of a tornado ripping through a junkyard and correctly assembling a Boeing 747. It did not happen, could not happen by natural means. And that is what science expects you to believe, and by and large, that is what most people believe, simply because science says so. never questioning that they have agendas that they have to tend to, just like the creationists did. Now, how did life really come on Earth? How did life really appear here? Well, the truth is well known, been known since the middle 70s, really. Well, you would think that when the lightning bolts hit the warm pond of water, that there would be only one type of life form created, some early bacteria, but one form. In fact, two forms come, the archaea and the eubacteria, and they are as distinctive as apples and walnuts. Completely different forms of life, but two types. And there are strata without them, and then suddenly there are strata with them, with their remains at around 3.8 billion years ago. They come, geologically speaking, overnight. Boom, they're just here, they just appear. It's as if somebody dumps them off here, and somebody did. This is what I think, and intervention people think, that the terraformers do. That there's no other explanation. Somebody flies around out there in the universe and they see a solar system forming, and they say, okay, let's sprinkle life out here and see where it takes. One of those is going to be in the zone of life of this sun, and that will be the one that we'll build on later, but we have to start somewhere. And they start with archaea and eubacteria, prokaryotic bacteria. Why? Because they are indestructible. They are indestructible. They can live in anything, in any new, you saw that seething mass that we saw earlier. Prokaryotes can live in that. You don't need a warm pond. They can live in lava. They can live in sulfur. They can live in high heat. They can live in methane. They can live in salt. They can live and do to this day in our most hostile environments. You will find prokaryotic bacteria living. They are the perfect seeds of life. If you were a terraformer and you wanted to get a foothold of life on the planet just as the planet was forming, you would sprinkle prokaryotic bacteria in there, because you would know that no matter what environment that planet throws at these things, they will thrive. And what will they do? They will take whatever is there, because they're anaerobic, and in their body life processes, they will produce oxygen. That is what they do. They produce oxygen. Now, what do you need if you're a terraformer? Why do you need these things producing oxygen? Because if you're going to build a planet that is going to support higher life, it's going to be built around oxygen, because everything seems to be, except for those that are anaerobic. There are things that are anaerobic and don't need it. But higher life forms all need oxygen. So you've got to start with that. What's the oxygen needed for it first, though? Iron. Iron is a big problem with forming planets. Iron is a dominant element in the universe. Most meteorites are heavy with iron. Iron is out there everywhere. What's the problem with iron on a planet? It's very reactive with oxygen. Put anything made of iron out for a few days and you're going to see rust start on it. Iron is very reactive with oxygen. So if you're going to put oxygen into the atmosphere of a planet, the first thing you have to do is tie up all the iron in the planet that's at the surface that will tie up the oxygen. And that is exactly what happened. The prokaryotes work for 1.4 billion years. 1.4, from 3.8 to 2.4 billion years, they tie up the iron and create what are called the banded iron formations. The banded iron formations. And there are millions of miles of banded iron formations around the world that needed to be created before oxygen could then get into the atmosphere. You had to tie up the iron so it would stop reacting with the oxygen. And the prokaryotic bacteria did that, again, for 1.4 billion years. And then at 2.4 billion years, it began to leak out from the water into the air, into the atmosphere, where it reacted with the methane that was there, because the Earth's early atmosphere was methane. And as it reacted with the methane, it created the great oxygenation event. which was a complete ice age around the whole Earth for 300 million years. For 300 million years, the Earth was just a ball of ice floating through space, but underneath that ice was volcanoes and still the prokaryotes working, making oxygen, and things were still going on under the ice. We don't really understand why this had to happen, but it's obviously a part of the cycle of life of a new and emerging planet. Something was going on that we don't yet understand. But at the end of that period, and we don't know how it ended, we don't know, I mean, we know when it ended, but we don't know why, what happened, but it was time for it to end, and it ended very quickly. And then it was time for the next step in the process of building a planet for higher life, eukaryotic bacteria. Now, in the same way that we think that there should have been one at the beginning and we got two with the prokaryotes, now you think there could be multiple types, but there are multiple types, but they're all eukaryotic. And a eukaryote has a nucleus for its DNA, whereas the prokaryotes have no nucleus. Their DNA floats around free in that bacteria, but in the eukaryotes, they're much more sophisticated, and they're much bigger, much more sophisticated, and all of their bodies have their DNA contained in the nucleus. And all things that come subsequent to eukaryotes, all life forms, including ourselves, we're eukaryotic creatures. Our cells have their DNA in the nucleus. So there's prokaryotes, no nucleus, and everything else, eukaryotes. Okay, now, it's important to understand the relative size and function of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes on the left, and you see that they are the size of this in a eukaryote. Little small things. This is the nucleus. Just to get that in scale. And they work together from 2.1 on, around 2.0 when the eukaryotes appear. Now it's prokaryotes and eukaryotes making a lot more oxygen together because the eukaryotes can make a lot more than the prokaryotes. And what are they doing? For the next 1 billion years, from 1.8 to 0.8 billion years ago, 1 billion years straight, prokaryotes and eukaryotes are building the ozone layer. Building the ozone layer. Now, what's the ozone layer? You can't have higher life on planet Earth without an ozone layer to shield out the ultraviolet light. Because if you don't have that, if the ozone layer goes, everything on the surface of the land will die, and everything in the first 2 feet or so of the water. Won't be living on the surface of the water. The ultraviolet light will kill them. You have to have an ozone layer. So, the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes for 1 billion years work on it, and they solve it, and they build, and they have the ozone layer, and now we're ready for the next thing. And what do we get? From 800 million years ago to 600 million years ago, we get another glaciation. This one's called a cryogenian glaciation. Lasts for 200 million years. The first one was 300 million years, this one's only 200 million years. And we don't know if in this case it was just one or if it was a series of 3, boom, boom, boom. We don't really know. It doesn't matter. It's another part of what is needed for life to begin to appear here in higher forms. Part of the cycle. A lot we still don't understand about it. But at 600 million years ago, it too ends, and ends fairly rapidly. And now we're ready to proceed with true higher life forms. So I want you to understand that this is how it went. The timeline of life on Earth from 3.8 billion years ago to now. You have the prokaryotes appearing at the beginning at 3.8. You see that the oxidizing of iron goes to around 2.4. Then you have the Huronian glaciation. Then you have the eukaryotes appear at 2 billion years ago, and you have the oxygen beginning, and that blue thick line is oxygen, and they work together to create the ozone layer. And once the ozone layer is created, then they start enriching the atmosphere itself, building it up to the 21% oxygen that we have now, enriching it. And if you see that spike, that big spike there at the top of advanced life forms, that's the period of advanced life forms that you see there. That's the period of the dinosaurs. And then you see where we are now at 21%. Okay? Somebody understood that this is how it has to happen. The terraformers out there understand this, all these stages have to happen in sequence, or you're not going to get a successful planet like we have with Earth. It has to be done in step, in phase, and the steps we're talking about are billions of years long. So what does that tell us about the terraformers? They have no concept of time as we understand it. Time has no meaning for them. Time for us has meaning. We break it into periods of years, and thousands of years, and billions. For them it's nothing. It's just, it just is. There is no time for whoever does this, for whoever did this. It's fantastic when you think about it. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, so now we're to the point of getting into the higher life forms. We have the emergence of life here. Now we go 4.5 billion years ago. Here we go. And we have the first two. We have the two types of prokaryotes, then we have the eukaryotes, and then around 600 million years ago we have something called Ediacara and fauna, which are the first complex life forms, and they last for about 50 million years, and then around 550 million years ago you have something called the Cambrian explosion. Now, again, science says, if you'll grant us this other miracle, we can explain everything else. They can't explain the Cambrian explosion, because again, literally, overnight, within a matter of a few million years, which is geologically is overnight relative to what's come before, you have thousands of different types of creatures put into the seas. And you have males and females, you have predators and prey, you have large, you have small, and they all look like they come from other planets. If you look at their fossilized remains, the closest thing we have living today is a trilobite. And a trilobite is a pretty doggone weird looking creature. But everything back then just looks like it came from somewhere else. And it did. Probably, in all likelihood, did. Things get wrought here. Things don't appear here. I mean, things don't evolve here. They appear here. I'm sorry. They appear here. They don't evolve here. They're brought here. And they're left to their own defenses until they're wiped out. And when I say wiped out, I mean exactly that. You see these 443 million years ago, 354 million years ago, 248 million years ago, 206 million years ago. This will sound familiar. 65 million years ago. What are those? Those are catastrophes. Those are wipeouts of all the life on Earth from 50 to 90%. Those are the great catastrophes that occur. Don't really know how. We believe that the one at 65 million years ago was from a large meteorite. But we can tell that they happen because you have all these teeming life forms in the strata of those periods, and then poof, there's just a drop-off down to again, 50 to 90% is gone, and then very quickly it starts coming right back up. The planet starts filling up with life again. And what science says is that evolution has a way of kicking into high gear when it's time to do that. That somehow evolution knows that it's supposed to go very, very, very incrementally slowly until there's a catastrophe, and somehow it knows to hit the accelerator and just proliferate like crazy. Now, right on its face, you know that's absurd. It either goes slow or it goes fast, but it doesn't have an accelerator. But it's the only way they can explain the reality of the fossil record. It's the only way they can explain it. Well, an easier way to explain it is that somebody's watching, terraformers are watching, and when there's a catastrophe, they say, uh-oh, another catastrophe on Earth, let's see what the atmosphere there is. Okay, this atmosphere, this new atmosphere will support this from here, and this from here, and this from here, and this from here. Let's go get it and bring it. And then boom, there it is. New life is brought and develops because it can live here in the new atmosphere after the catastrophe. And that's why each group that looks so different, and why things in the past look so different from what they are today. All right, now, let's talk about whether it's evolution or intervention that moves life through its course on Earth. We have it starting up here in the right-hand corner as the prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and it sweeps around here through all these various forms, and it goes up to humans. We are the, of course, top of the food chain, top of everything. How did all that happen? Well, according to science, that happens by evolution. Slowly, gradually, incrementally, as we saw with the earlier cartoon, things change via mutations, except after a catastrophe when they change very fast. That's how science explains it. Or, the only other explanation is that everything is brought here in a form, and by just gradual small changes, it changes form, but one thing doesn't change into another thing. Understand that. Evolution requires that whole bodies change into other new bodies. Evolution. That's called macroevolution. Change at the macro level, at the whole level. Intervention requires only microevolution, which is change in parts, change in pieces. Something's brought here and it modifies into something else, but it's still basically the thing that was brought here. Now, let's talk about Darwin. What Darwin saw, actually, was only microevolution. He never saw macroevolution. Never saw it. And so nobody else has either. What he saw was microevolution in the finches on the Galapagos Islands, who had different beaks and different head sizes for dealing with the different environments, whether it be seeds or fruits or insects or whatever they developed the ability to eat on the various islands. But they were all still finches. They were all still the original finch that flew out from from Chile, flew out from Chile or however it got there, and landed on the Galapagos. They're all still finches. Microevolution Darwin saw, and he extrapolated that macroevolution had to occur over massive lengths of time. And he also saw it in tortoises, where you have the low-shell tortoises that eat bushes low to the ground, and you have the high-shell tortoises that eat the leaves out of trees that are higher up. Microevolution. That is what Darwin saw, and he extrapolated macroevolution, but he also added the caveat, as any good scientist would. If the transitional species are not available, if proof is not found, then my theory is wrong. It's been 150 almost years, and they're still looking, and there's still not a single incontrovertible piece of evidence to show macroevolution. Science will tell you there is. They'll show you the horse, and they'll say, oh, look how the horse did, and they'll show you different ones. All you have to do is read a book called Icons of Evolution, and you'll see every one of those are just bald-faced lies. They're just constructed to fool the average person, as is most of what science puts out in regard to these subjects that I'm talking about today. It's all a house of cards that they just use to prop up a theory that's totally empty, totally bankrupt, and they know it. They know it, and they've known it for a long time. But in order to concede that they don't really know what's going on, is to give the creationists the room to say, well, if you can't explain it, then why not? Why can't we be taught equally and all that? Nobody wants that. I don't want that. I'm not pushing for that, but I am pushing for the truth. I am pushing for the truth. And the truth is, science is wrong about these things. I believe so is religion. I think that the answer lies with the terraformers, and eventually we have to get toward the truth. We have to start looking at these possibilities and start beginning to wrap our heads around them. Okay, now, if that's true what I say, and we're going to jump now we're going to start talking about primates and higher primates, and skip all the middle steps. Now again, everything that I'm leaving out is a lot of it is dealt with in that ebook that I showed you earlier, Intervention Theory Essentials, if you want to learn more about this. But for now, we're just sort of skimming over the highlights. If I'm right, if interventionists are correct, things are brought at different times. Monkeys were brought around 33 billion years ago. Before then, no monkeys on the fossil record. After then, lots of monkeys. So they just appeared. Like everything else, like the Cambrian explosion and everything else, you've got monkeys. And then tailless apes appeared 10 million years later, around 23 million years ago, at the start of what's called the Miocene epoch. All right? And what you're told is that monkeys evolved into chimps, that the monkeys evolved into chimps. But there are no transitional species. You go from monkeys appearing, and And then you have the tailless apes appearing. And physiologically, they didn't evolve one into the other because they're too different. Physiologically, they're too different. It didn't happen. Couldn't happen. But science just pretends like, okay, yeah, you can see one was here, and then you've got the other one, and there's evolution, and that's it. Forget about it. Don't forget about it. It's not right. The Miocene epoch begins around 23 million years ago, and it extends down to just 5 million years ago. Okay? 18 million years period, a million-year period. And in that time, unlike this slide, which shows dominantly monkeys with apes, but I can't find one the other way around, flip that. In the Miocene era, that was dominated by tailless apes, by the apes. And the monkeys took a second back seat to these guys. The monkeys were in the minority during that period, the early period of the Miocene age. There were as many as 50 to 100, they say. I don't believe it's that many, but they claim there's as many as 50 to 100 different species of Miocene ape, tailless ape. And we're left now with the 4 that we know: chimps, gorillas, gibbons, and orangutans. Just 4. Everything else went extinct. All of the other tailless apes went extinct. It's a lot of extinctions, and very specific extinctions as well. I don't think it was that many. Okay, we have 2 basic kinds of Miocene ape. Everybody pretty much, well, everybody agrees with this. You have the long-armed Miocene apes, and you have the short-armed Miocene apes. Now, the long-armed Miocene apes are the quadrupeds that we all know and love today: the chimps, the gorillas, the gibbons, the orangutans. And when you're a quadruped, this is how you walk comfortably. You have to walk, and you can see why. Your legs are shorter than your arms are longer than your legs. So it's really the only way you can move around comfortably. But if you're a short-armed Miocene ape, what does that mean? It means your legs are equal to the length of your arms. Your arms are equal to your legs. It's the same. So you can't really move around as a quadruped comfortably. Now humans, keep in mind, humans' arms are significantly shorter than our legs. Significantly shorter than our legs. So if we're long-armed apes, our hands are down around our knees as we walk. That's where their hands are. But science insists that these creatures, the short-armed Miocene apes, walked in what's called the knuckle-dragging fashion, that they were all bent over like you see in the picture, and their knuckles were dragging on the ground. And in 20 million years, it never occurred to a single one of them to stand up upright to be a little more comfortable. Never occurred to a single one of them to say, "Hey, Martha, it feels better if you stand up like this," you know. No, it never happened. They were that stupid to just keep walking like that. Do you believe it? What if we could show evidence that there was, in fact, upright walking apes during the Miocene? What would that do to the world? What would that do to the conception of science and their insistence that there was nothing but knuckle draggers in the Miocene, in the early Miocene era, late Miocene era? There is evidence. There is a creature called Morotopithecus, whose remains were dated at around 21.6 million years ago. Morotopithecus in Africa. All right? And they got a pretty good number of its bones, and here you see them, but miracle of miracles, they have a spine bone. A spine bone. A lumbar spine. Back here, lumbar. Spine bone. And look at it. Can't really tell much from it there until you put it beside a human lumbar spine bone. And what do you have? A very close match. Morotopithecus was perfectly capable of walking upright. And remember, it's a short-armed Miocene ape. It's not a quadruped. Perfectly capable of walking upright, and yet, supposedly, it's a knuckle dragger too. Never thinking to stand up a little bit and get a little better view of things. Now, look at compared to other primate lumbar spine bones. A gibbon, a chimp, an orangutan, and a gorilla. Look, see how they are all set up? And look at the Morotopithecus, and then look at a human. What does Moro look like? Doesn't look like any of these. It looks like the human. 21.6 million years ago, folks, this thing's walking upright. And this is what science doesn't want you to know. It doesn't want you to realize, doesn't want you to think, because that leads to a humongous problem for them if they have to acknowledge that any of the Miocene apes were walking upright. And the thing they have to acknowledge is that hominoids are real, and we're going to talk about that shortly. But anyway, we have another one, Pyrrholopithecus, at 13 million years ago. 13 million years ago. And we have another one of those very human-like lumbar spine bones. But notice the hands on this one again. A short-armed ape with hands down around its knees. At 13 million years ago. So we have one at 21 million years ago, and now we got one at 13 million years ago. With clear evidence of the capacity to walk upright, and very likely was walking upright. All bipedal pre-humans had arms as long as their legs. All of them. Go back to Lucy. Go back to any of them. They're all short-armed apes, but they're walking upright. They acknowledge that Lucy walked upright. Why? Because they have her feet, and they can show that she walked upright. So at around 6 million years ago, 5 to 6 million years ago, they start having to acknowledge that there were upright walking primates. But what do? They call them, oh, well, those are the pre-humans. Those aren't upright walking primates. No, those are pre-humans. Those are the ones on the way evolving into humans. So there's a cutoff point at around 6 million years ago, beyond which you're a knuckle dragger, and ahead of which you suddenly can walk upright, because the evidence is just overwhelming and they have no choice but to deal with it. But they're still able to cloud those later years. They're still able to keep Pyrrholopithecus off the boards as an upright walker, and Morolopithecus off the boards as an upright walker. But that'll change. Eventually that's going to change, because the facts are obvious. All of this is going to change in the end because the facts are obvious. Maybe not in my lifetime, but this is the truth. This is the way it's going to be in the end, because this is reality. Now, this is how science insists bipedality as we understand it, upright walking as I am now, as we all do. This is how they insist it began. Just like the development of life. Slowly, incremental change, slow change, going from down on all fours to a knuckle dragger to a little bit more upright until walking upright, but you're still an ape. And that's the closest I can get to a picture to illustrate that. This is how they say it happened. Now remember, you're coming from a forested environment out onto savanna. Understand how it worked. They say the jungles and forests were shrinking, and we were forced, it was do or die to get out on the savanna and make our way and become terrestrial primates, not arboreal primates, but terrestrial, living on the land, right? And we did that slowly, incrementally, working our way out from the edges out into the grasslands, right? And they just say it, and it happened, because here we are. It had to have happened, here we are. Well, the problem with that is the grasslands are covered with big cats. Look at Africa, big cats everywhere. These early supposed pre-humans creeping out from the forest to take over the grasslands. What are they? They are a skin bag full of meat. They have no tough hide. They have no fangs and claws. They have terrible foot speed, and they're stupid. There's not a cat, even a small cat, that can't take one of us down and kill us. We are the cherries on top of the sundaes of their normal meals. You know, wildebeests and zebras and things like that. We're the cherries. Oh, good, another one of those, you know. Not one would have survived. Not one. 10 feet out from the forest into the grasslands. Boom, plucked like a cherry. It never would have happened the way science says. It could not have happened. Not in the real world. This is science's march to humanity as they say it happened. And we've all seen this picture. It's very, very common. But it's also a huge, humongous lie. It's just a gross distortion of reality. The truth of it is, you had these kinds of creatures, the hair-covered, upright walking primates, starting at around at minimum 21 million years ago, and then suddenly at 200,000 years ago, according to our genetics, we appear as we are. And there's nothing in between. There's them and then there's us. Right up until 200,000 years ago. And that's the reality. Now, let's look at a different scenario entirely. Here you have a shot of the famous Patterson-Gimlin film. Now, I'm not going to go into, there's so much other evidence for the reality of hominoids that I would just urge you to get Intervention Theory Essentials if you want to read that, or my other book, Everything You Know Is Wrong, or anything like that. Plenty of details there. We're just going to go over some highlights here to make you understand that this is really plausible, what I'm saying. You have the Patterson-Gimlin film, which everyone has seen. It was filmed in October of '67, and you see exactly what we've been talking about. An upright walking, short-armed Miocene ape that's just living today, just as it did 20 million years ago. 20 million years, right straight down to 1967 and right on to today, hominoids live. And the word hominoid is used because it's fallen out of favor with science, and so the Russians kind of co-opted it to start talking about these creatures, and I have, and now most people call them hominoids. And that is, there are four kinds of them. There's not just Bigfoot Sasquatch. There's Bigfoot Sasquatch, the giant kind. There's Yeti, abominable snowman, a more man-sized kind. There's another type of man-sized ones called almas. We're going to talk about a very famous alma. And then there's the pygmy kind that live around the jungles of the equator. And those are like the hobbits. So you have the almas. When I say human man-sized, I mean 5 to 7 feet tall, 300 to 500 pounds. The Yeti and abominable snowman are about the same, 5 to 7 feet tall, 300 to 500 pounds. And then you have the giants, the Bigfoot Sasquatch, 7 to 10 feet tall, 700 to 1,000 pounds. Big. And they're all of them big, like you see here with the Patterson Patty, the female that you see there. Very bulky and muscular. And incredibly strong relative to us. All primates, pound for pound, monkeys, chimps, right on down, pound for pound, 5 to 10 times stronger than we are physically. 5 to 10 times stronger. So extremely powerful creatures. They're not prey animals or anything. Nobody eats them. They eat. They can kill a cat. Cat jumps on one of them, boom! One lick on the spine, paralyzed, dead, done. Not going to happen. Everything leaves them alone. They are not prey animals. And that partly explains why we don't go out in the woods and just see their bodies. They know when they're sick and they're going to die, they tuck themselves away and you just never see them. But anyway, the Patterson film, there was a BBC recreation in 1998 where they did the best they could to reproduce it. And what they found is that they couldn't find anybody to get in the suit whose arm dangled down to their knee. And they couldn't find an elbow that broke at the position that the hominoid elbows break at, move at. So you really couldn't repeat it. But the film itself, what you see in it when you look up close, is you see the muscles moving in the shoulders and in the thighs. You see the muscles rippling under the skin. And as she turns in this famous picture here, you see the perfect sway of her breasts. Perfectly normal in 1967, and they didn't even have phony breasts that were realistic in 1967. It just didn't happen. All this that you hear about people saying there were people in a suit and it was done with suits and all, it's ridiculous. Because to get the muscles to move, if you could talk Arnold Schwarzenegger or somebody like him, Lou Ferrigno, into doing it back then, they'd have to glue the suit to the skin to try to get that ripple effect, but as soon as you did that, no ripple effect. This was real, regardless of what you hear. That was real. And while Roger Patterson died about 5 years after, Bob Gimlin is still alive, and I've talked to Bob Gimlin about that day extensively. And all you have to do is talk to that guy, and you'll see. straight shooter, absolutely your standard cowboy, tough guy. He wouldn't make it up. Now, this is the Minnesota Iceman, which was also coincidentally killed in early 1967. And the story that you see on the magazine cover came out in Argosy in May 1969. Now, the man who killed it and put it in the freezer and took it around and showed it on display was named Frank Hansen. Now, if Frank Hansen had been a different kind of man, this whole business about hominoids and Bigfoot and all, it'd be over in 1967. He would have just presented the body and that would have been the end of it. But in 1967, people didn't really know what they were. They were fairly new, and there was a lot of talk that they might be just wild humans, a kind of wild form of human, and that killing one could bring murder charges. And so Frank Hansen was not only concerned about that, and perhaps rightly so, but guess what he did as part of his occupation? He worked with the carnival circuit. He was a carny. He knew the hustle. He knew the carny hustle. And so he said, oh, this is going to make me rich. What seems to have happened, and if you look at the photograph here, this is a photograph of it. You see this circle right here in the middle of the chest right here? That's a big bullet hole. And I saw it. I can tell you from eyewitness seeing it what it looked like, the real one. And there was a real one, and then he had a fake one made, a rubber one made, that just surfaced recently this year and is now on display, I think, somewhere in Austin or Houston in a museum there. But he had a rubber copy made because he knew there were going to be problems with authorities once he started showing it. So he had a rubber one made that he could, whenever the FBI or anybody came to see him, the police, he'd say, yeah, sure, here, come see it, x-ray it. And he'd let them x-ray the dummy and say, no bones in that, it's a dummy. And they put the word out, and they just sort of left him alone. And so he could go out with the real one. I saw it 10 years later in '76. It was as fresh as the day. I mean, look, just perfectly fresh, perfectly pristine when I saw it. And what you saw was the wounds, and the wounds were obvious. And I'll describe them to you. What happened was, whether this was a juvenile Bigfoot or an adult almas or man-sized, we don't know. I personally think it was a juvenile because it just didn't, its flesh, its skin, its feet, its fingers, its hands, it didn't look really heavily worn to me. I think, and a lot of people think it was a juvenile Bigfoot type. But it could have been otherwise. But anyway, whatever it was, Frank Hansen is out deer hunting in the woods of Minnesota where he lived. And he sees it, and most people, when they see him, they don't shoot him. They just, there's something, they're too human when they have the ability to do it, and there are a number of testimonies on record of people not shooting when they had the chance. He did. He plugged it right between the shoulder blades. Shot it right in the back. And it blew out that hole in its front. But apparently it didn't hit its heart immediately. Because while it paralyzed it apparently, and it dropped down to the ground, it dropped on apparently to its side, to its right side. It seems to have lifted up, as Hansen went up to finish it off with a coup de grace, it seems to have lifted up its left arm to shield its face, as any of us probably would do. When you see a gun pointing down at your face and you don't know what that is, but you know that something bad's going on, it lifted its arm up, and Hansen shot, and he shot it through the wrist, and you can see the wounds, and you can see the shattered bone in the wrist. And the bullet went in its left eye socket, blew that out, blew out the back of its head, and exploded the right eyeball so that the sac of the eyeball was hanging out of the cheek here like a big teardrop. Those are the wounds. It's also bleeding from the nose and bleeding from the mouth. And when I say bleeding, I don't mean gushing blood. Hansen got the body. He had others with him somehow, I think it was a truck. They got the body into the truck, he took it home, hosed it off, bled it out, got the freezer, put it in the freezer, filled it up, and froze it. And as it was freezing, the body was still oozing. You know how you scrape your elbow and you get that kind of pinkish ooze? That's what you saw when you looked in the block of ice. You would see these tendrils, these pink tendrils of ribbons of pink going up to the surface, and they'd spread out in circles when they got up to the surface. They would just spread out. And the wounds were, there were 2 or 3 tendrils coming from chest wound because it was so big. You had one coming from each nostril, you had one coming from the corners of the mouth, and you had them coming up out of the eye sockets. Right to the surface. You couldn't miss it. It was an ex-living thing there, shot and killed and oozing plasma in that block of ice. And I paid my money and went through it 3 times. And I was 30 years old and I had eyes like an astronaut. And I could see clearly. And you could see the hair, you could see the hair down into the skin. The water lifted the hair up off the skin. You could see every circular hair coming out of every pore. It was absolutely real. And there's no way to make fake hairs where you don't make a little nick in the hole as you punch the hair in and pull the instrument out. You could see all this. This was the real deal. Here is a picture of it on the left, and when they fixed it up to put it in the magazine, in Argosy magazine, they humanized it. They shrunk the hands, they shrunk the nose, they made it look more human-ish than it really actually was. The drawing, the original drawing from Ivan Sanderson, there on the right, you see how much more ape-like it is. And you see the break in the arm. That was very clear. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention with the wounds in the arm. The arm was leaking as well, and the arm was up here, just like you see there. So, and you could also see bone chips. You could see white pieces of bone chip as well in the wounds. So this is, now it wasn't like air ice. It wasn't. It was tap water ice. So parts of it were very cloudy. Parts of it you couldn't even see through, like thick clouds. But other parts, just like with ice cubes, you know how some part of them will be cloudy and others will be absolutely like air? A lot of it was like air. Absolutely crystal clear. You couldn't miss it. Trust me, this was real. Now, another great story we want to talk about is Zana in Russia. Now, this is like we have the Patterson film and we have the Minnesota Iceman. They have the Zana story in Russia. And Russia does, by the way, some very good research into hominoids. They absolutely do. Very good work. And back in the middle 60s, a guy named, I forget it, I'm sorry. Back in the 60s, Porshnev, Dr. Porshnev, did research on this story in a village called Tikhina. And the village of Tikhina had a slave, hominoid, Alma type, man-sized, 5 to 7 feet tall. They called her Zana. And she came to the village in about 1850, and she lived there until 1890 when she died. She died in 1890. They don't know how old she was when she got there, but she was an adult, clearly. So they don't really know how old she was when she died, but she was there at least 40 years. So while there, as was the case with others in those very small, isolated villages in Russian territory where these creatures lived, if they could capture a male or a female, it was a very good thing for a village to have because they could be slaves, work slaves to do grunt work because they were so strong. They could go fetch firewood for everybody in the village. They could carry water from the local river for everybody and never get tired because they were just so strong. They could carry big, heavy sacks of grain and things to the mill for grinding, and they could bring the flour and whatever back in huge sacks, and they were dray animals. And if it was a female, even better. You had a sex object for all the men in the village in the area to use anytime they wanted. And that was Zana's fate for those years in Tikhina. And during that time, over those 40 years, with probably thousands of sexual encounters and the ability to get pregnant, she got pregnant 8 times. 8 times with human men. And she produced 8 live offspring, the first 4 of which she killed accidentally. Because as soon as they would come out, she would take them to the local river, the Makla River, which is a freezing river, a glacial river, and wash them off. And they were, as you see in the picture, very human-like, and they would die. So the last 4, the village women took them from her. Because they looked so human, they figured, well, maybe they'll grow up and look more human than look like her. And every pair of hands in a village was important. And what if they're as strong as she is, or close to as strong? They can be, be really good workers. And, So they raised the last 4 to adulthood. And they were very human relative to her. You could see that they were her children. Clearly they had some odd things about them. They were bigger, their hair was wiry, but they weren't covered in it the way she was. And most importantly, they could speak. They could speak. They had high-pitched voices, but they could speak. She never could speak, but she learned the language. She was smart. But she, being a primate, primates don't have the throat, the mechanism to speak that we have. They've tried to teach Coco the gorilla and all that. They don't have the mechanism to speak. She didn't either. But you could say, Zana, go get water, Zana, go get wood, Zana, do this, Zana, do that, and she knew what to do, and she would go do it. She knew the language, she understood. But she couldn't speak. Her children could all speak. And they were all of reasonable intelligence, and they lived their lives in the area, or they moved out and they got married. They had children. This is an incredible story, documented fully in the 60s, and this is an area of particularly long-lived people. And when they were documenting it, there were 12 people still alive in the mid-60s who were alive and saw and were attended her funeral in 1890 in the local cemetery. But they couldn't agree where she was buried, so they've not been able, because it's a Muslim area and they didn't mark headstones, and they couldn't remember exactly where she was. You couldn't just dig up the whole cemetery to find her. But her youngest son, Fit, born around 1884 and died in 1954, he had only died 10 years earlier. They knew right where he was. So they were able to dig him up, to exhume his body. And so he died at the age of 70, and here you see his skull compared to a human skull found nearby, and you see the difference. It's not really exactly a human skull. That's much more Neanderthalish, much more like a Neanderthal skull. And Fit had his Neanderthalish traits. And you see he has fat lips, he has that very kinky curly hair. He was a big guy, very bad tempered, very ill-tempered man, everybody says. And in fact, lost a hand in a fight. But he was also skilled and talented, and could sing very well, liked to party. Anyway, an interesting guy, but well known, well understood, well remembered. This is not just pulling it out of a hat. This is his family. His daughter, Tanya, in the 70s. His son, Shalico, and his daughter, Raya. Shalico's daughters, Rita and Zoya in 76. Wife, Maria, daughter, Raya. The point here is Zana's family is alive and well and living in Russia. And what we're going to talk about in the next lecture about the star child is DNA, mitochondrial DNA. It would be very easy to check the mitochondrial DNA of any of her ancestors any of her offspring, any of her progeny, because mitochondrial DNA comes down from the female. The male or female, their mitochondrial DNA comes from her, from Zana, through Zana. So you could compare theirs to normal humans and see what the differences are, if anybody was interested in doing that. And so far as I know, nobody has. I want to do it, but it takes money. Everything takes money. But I'd love to do that and see what the results are. Maybe the Russians have already done it, and that's why we don't hear anything about it. Because they know what the answer is. Because this whole hominoid thing opens up a real can of worms. Now, the question you're all going to ask, and everybody always asks, is, well, if hominoids are real as you say, and they're everywhere, they're on every continent except Antarctica, they're out there in the hundreds of thousands, they're living on half of the arable land of the earth belongs to them. We think we live on every square inch of everything. Absolutely absurd. 40% to 50% of the arable land of the earth, take away the ice caps, take away the deserts. We're talking the forested areas and the savannas and the plains and prairies and all of that, and in the jungles. Half of it is terra incognita. Half of it hasn't even ever been foot surveyed once, because you can't get in there and do it. It's just too hard going. Fly over certain parts of our country, look down, and you won't see the first sign of civilization down there, except maybe roads cutting through it, maybe. That's where they live. They own half the planet still, after all of our incursions everywhere. Hominoids have plenty of room to live and die and never even know that humans exist except for the planes flying overhead. So the question is, how do we not see them even though they can live in such isolation, because there's so many reports of encounters? The panda story. Let me close this with the panda story. The panda was the hominoid of the 1800s, of the early 1800s. These stories would come out of China of a black and white bear that ate only bamboo. And every expert in the world that would hear this would just laugh. They didn't even have to go to China and figure this out, because yes, you could have black bears, you could have brown bears, you could have white bears, but you couldn't have two-tone bears. And all bears were omnivores. Everybody knew that. You couldn't have a vegetarian bear. Couldn't happen. So nobody took it seriously at all, even though the Chinese kept saying, yeah, they're here, they're here, they're here. And finally, in 1869, a Frenchman, Armand David, Father Armand David, was there, and he saw the hide of one pinned up in an elder's wall, on an elder's wall. He saw the hide of one. Is it time? And so when he saw that, he realized it was real. And so he said, I want one of these. What would it take to get one of these? And he was told, oh, they're very hard to see. They're very hard to find. Anytime we get one, it's by accident. You know, it's really not going to happen. He said, I'll pay anything. I'll pay. Please go. Please try. I'll pay, and there'll be a big reward and all this. Got to have it, because he was a naturalist and he knew the value of this thing. So they said, oh, you know, even today, the Chinese don't like to offend. They said, okay, well, we'll give it a try. And they went out, a group of them went out, and in 12 days, they brought back a living Baishu panda. They had it. He was amazed. He was so excited. Oh, we've got it. Puts it on a ship, puts it in a cage, puts it on a ship, bringing it back. Well, it goes nuts on the ship, and it starts banging itself against the cage, and it's just going to kill itself. And so he just has to put it out of its misery. And it really hurts him, but he knows he's got the skin, he's got the body, he's going to be able to prove it. And he does. So he brings it back to Paris, and it creates a worldwide sensation. Absolutely worldwide sensation. This thing is real. It's just like when the first hominoid is found, and it's just going to be the same thing. And so then there became this race to be the first museum, the first zoo, to bring in the first living panda bear. And so they started sending teams into Sichuan province, which is about the size of Arizona, I think. Sending teams into these bamboo forests to get the panda. And in the 1800s, late 1800s, understand, these are people that knew their way around woods, that knew their way around hard country. Mountainous terrain covered with bamboo, but mountainous terrain covered with trees, what's the difference? Not a lot. Now, they're after a creature that lives in the daytime, operates in the daytime, is very starkly contrasted by its environment. It's black and white, and it lives in a deep green environment. It's incredibly slow moving. You've all seen how pandas do. They're very slow moving, and they're very dim-witted. And the old saying goes, they're as stupid as a bag of hammers. They're not smart creatures. And so, how hard is this going to be with some of the best field teams in the world being very well paid to go out there and get one? How long is it going to take? Take a guess. What would you imagine? Outside, Really stretch yourself. 10 years, 15 years,
2
20
months.
years. Huh?
2 months.
2 months. 60 years.
Oh my God.
60 years. Now, this is not to imply that they were out there day in and day out, 24/7 for 60 years. They gave it a hard push for 5 or 10 years, and then they gave up with the theory that they really must be extinct now. Because we've been over every inch of this area, we can't find another one, and they must not be here. They were there in the hundreds, in the thousands. But they weren't being found because why? That's their environment. It's not our environment. We have the arrogance to believe that we can go out there in the environment of other creatures that are used to keeping themselves hidden and protected, and that they're just going to roll over and, show up. Hey, how y'all doing? It ain't going to happen. So by 1900, they were just forgotten. They were again relegated to the pages of extinct creatures. Even though the Chinese kept saying, no, they're still here. We're still seeing them every so often. Can't be. And they went back to ridiculing them. And then, in 1929, 60 years later, it became the fashion in the early 1900s for young bucks with too much money and too much time on their hands who like to hunt to go to such one province and give it a go. See what was there. And 2 of those young men who did that were Teddy Roosevelt, President Teddy Roosevelt's sons, Kermit and Teddy Jr. Kermit and Teddy Jr. So they're out there, and Teddy Jr. sees one, plugs it, and drops it. Teddy Jr. kills the next panda bear in 1929. Again, another sensation worldwide. Man, everybody's excited. Well, we're going to find one now for sure. And they start making copies of it and everything. And guess what? Teddy's bear. Teddy's bear.
Oh, teddy bear.
That's where the word teddy bear comes from. Everybody's forgotten that. Teddy's bear. So, then the teams went out again, and more failure. And this is a great anecdote to end with. A woman led the first team to capture a living one. And she did it twice, 2 years in a row. This is a great story. This is a great story that needs to be told. But the point of it is that if pandas can't be found with all of that effort, imagine going after a highly mobile, highly intelligent, basically nocturnal creature, hominoids, and trying to find them and bring them back. It partially explains why it's so difficult. Okay, again, anybody that wants to read more about any of these things, Intervention Theory Essentials is an ebook you can find at lloydpye.com, $10. Cheap but twice the price because it's a lot of fun to read, a lot of pictures just like this, very easy to understand, and I think well worth anyone's time and effort to learn more about these things that almost nobody knows anything about. Thank you very much, and I'll see you this afternoon.
One of the interesting theories about where regarding extraterrestrials and UFO sightings that has always fascinated me is that the possibility that they come from much closer than we think. Perhaps even from one of our local neighboring planets. We think we have a grasp on exactly everything in our solar system and everything in our planet, but we don't really. Once you hear Lloyd's presentation, read his books, you realize we don't know everything that's out there. I'd like to invite everybody back at 12:45 that's 15 minutes to 1 for our next lecture. Last week was the 40th year anniversary of one of the most fascinating UFO cases in our world's history, the Pascagoula, Mississippi UFO encounter involving 2 men, Calvin Parker and let's see, the other gentleman, his name escaped me now, Hickson, right? Charles Hickson. Okay, so Charles Hickson, Calvin Parker were fishing in Pascagoula, and they were abducted by the occupants of a flying disc. So Mr. Stephen Droska, who's done extensive research on this case and is currently working on a book about it, will be speaking at 12:45, and he will be followed by a 2-hour presentation on the Coyame, Mexico's Roswell case, which occurred with about 40 to 50 miles from here, where the UFO and the small plane crashed. And we've got some fantastic new information to share with you. Ruben Uriarte and I, and also Gilbert Rivera from Chihuahua is with us, and Carlos Guzman, Carlos in the front seat, two of the most noted UFO researchers in Mexico will be joining us for this presentation from 2 to 4. And then after that, we're going to have Mr. Lloyd Pye give his, and I'm totally, completely, 100% honest when I say jaw-dropping presentation on the Star Child skull, found near here, by the way, in Chihuahua State. This strange skull that scientific testing has shown is not human. So you won't want to miss that this afternoon. And then our featured presentation tonight, of course, Mr. Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky, the incredible experience he had of being aboard a strange craft for 5 days while everybody on Earth assumed that he was dead. So you won't want to miss that. I recommend those of you that haven't experienced it, David Beebe's food trailer, taco trailer is parked out there. He's got excellent food, which I've already sampled a while ago. And so just join us back here at 12:45. Brad Newton, who's hosting this event, has a couple of messages from the men in black.
I'm Agent Brad in Black, at least today. A couple of things are going on here. We would be happy to sell you a t-shirt. However, we're also giving away some t-shirts. And so what the deal is that the Presidio alien EBGB, we call him Bubba, EBGB is out in town shopping, and I understand he's at the Yeti store. I'll give you a clue, but he's probably going to be moving soon. But what the game is you go find EB, have your picture made, and we're going to Facebook you, and then we check. We're looking at the Facebook. Then you can come back here and say, I got my picture made with EB, go to your Facebook page, we see you, we give you a Ozone t-shirt. And then, of course, that kind of frees up some bucks where you can buy somebody you like a t-shirt too. So we're thrilled to death to have you here in Presidio. Like I said, we have the Boys to Men trailer out there that can feed you, but there's several restaurants in town, the Charlie's, the Patio, and La Plaza Vida and the Oasis are the main sit-down restaurants, but they all have really good Mexican food. And then there's some of the taco stands around town as well. So one other thing is that the farmers market is going to be going for a few more minutes up until noon, and it's over across from the AutoZone. Just go straight down the hill. Look over there by the post office, and there it is. They have some stuff. But I have invited the vendors to come up here after lunch. So if you don't, we'll see what we get. And anyway, you guys have a wonderful day in Presidio. The weather's great outside. It's not its usual 115 degrees that we dodge. This is a place where shade feels good. Anyway, you're dismissed to do that, and we're going to be back here at what time?
12:45.
12:45. Más o menos.